have Donielle Prince then speak a little bit about her section for the last 35 minutes or so, and then there'll be a Q&A at the end of that one. All right. During this time, if you have any questions that come up, feel free to put them in the chat, and Sarah Michael is going to be great at monitoring the chat. If you want to save them for the end of each section, that's like totally fine too. It's really up to you. All right. So thank you all for putting in your information in the chat box. It's great to see so many people in one area all working with youth and really caring about our youth and youth mental health and all of those things. And so it's really great to be amongst a lot of really like-minded people, and it's just really inspiring me to do this work. So we'll talk a little bit about stress and coping skills for youth. Like Sarah Michael said, I am a youth mental health specialist. I am a marriage family therapist associate. I have been working with youth since I was a teenager, so quite a few years now. And I have been in many different capacities, from, you know, an athletic coach to camp counselors to outdoor educator to facilitator, therapist, all sorts of different roles in the schools, out of schools, things like that. And so this is really passionate. Like, this is something I'm really passionate about, mostly because I know what I was going through when I was a youth. And I'm sure we can all think back on our own, you know, childhoods and teenage years. And I imagine that's why a lot of us do the work that we do. Is because of kind of our own lived experiences. So this topic is really it's for you, and it's also for you to reflect on your own stress and coping skills, and then how you can translate that into the work that you do with young people. So we get a little bit of both here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about signs and symptoms for stress. We're going to talk about how to talk about stress with youth. And then, of course, self-care, right? We all love the self-care. Saw lots of really amazing responses in the chat about that good old self-care. All right. So what does stress look like? So I'm sure we can think of different ways in our own lives of how it shows up, but I really want to focus on what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. So for example, what it doesn't look like. This is me last week. I know, I'm just going to rub it in for a second. It was pretty amazing. I was able to relax and take a vacation last week. It was the first one in a very long time. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced not being able to get away. But the week before that, this is pretty much what I looked like. I was stressed out to the max and pretty burned out, honestly, at just everything I was doing. So I started to notice that I was really stressed and burned out because of some signs and symptoms that I was recognizing in my mental health, but also in my physical health as well. So that's kind of what we're going to go over next. So physically, right? Stress shows up physically in our body. And I know Donielle is going to touch on this more in depth. So this is just kind of an overview. So this can show up in, you know, feeling tired, physical muscle tension. I know for me, sitting at a desk, I'm not used to sitting as much during this COVID time. And so my body was telling me, I was having, my hip flexors, even like my shoulders, my back, like things were really starting to not feel very great. So that muscle tension was really starting to show up. Even like hair falling out, weight gain or weight loss. Those are both indications of stress. Headaches, migraines, stomach aches, your heart beating fast, and zits. This is a really big one, because especially when we work with young people, they might be like, oh, my face. And it's a really good way of like, well, are you feeling stressed out? It could be a really good opener, and to kind of have that conversation and to normalize that, like, that happens. And it's a really common occurrence. So physically, a lot goes on in the body. Stress manifests itself in the body. Also, it manifests itself mentally, right? So tired. So there's the difference between physically tired, right? Your body, maybe you don't want to get out of bed. You just want to like throw the covers over your head. But then there's the mentally tired. That's like, oh, I could sleep all day and still I'm just not, I'm kind of in this fog, right? So there's a difference between the physically tired and the mentally tired. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. And kind of feeling a little depressed, a little sad, a little low. As a mental health clinician, I hesitate using words like depressed or anxious because people will often stigmatize these and being like, oh, I am depressed if I feel depressed. And I just want to say that feeling symptoms of depression, feeling low, feeling sad is very normal. And there's a lot of reasons going on in our world right now that we might feel sad or low or feeling depressed, right? And so sometimes when we work with young people, they might think, oh, if I'm feeling depressed, I am depressed, I have depression. And I think it's just a really good conversation to have around, like, you know what, maybe some of these are pretty common, maybe these are pretty normal, and it might not meet this like criteria for a full blind diagnosis. And it sounds like, kind of from the chat, there's a few of us in here who might be able to make that diagnosis. But for the most part, if you're feeling like somebody is prolonged lowness or prolonged sadness, like months, like over a month long, 2 months long, be good to maybe get them some professional, have them get a professional assessment happening. But other than that, just really normalizing that right now it is absolutely okay to feel sad and low and depressed sometimes, and that these things kind of come and go. And I'm sure you can think of your own life where you maybe have experienced little bits of these things, and maybe that can be something that you can share with them as well. So moving on to anxiousness, I kind of, same little spiel for anxious. I talk to a lot of teens these days who are like, nobody understands, like nobody else has anxiety. And I pause them right there and I say, every single human being experiences anxiety. Anxiety is the body's response to fear, and it is very normal, right? So yes, there are some people who have more anxiety and some people have less anxiety. And so again, just really normalizing this, and anxiety can show up in many different ways. Sometimes it can look like we're just really restless. So kind of feeling this like buzz in your body or in your mind, the mind doesn't want to shut off, things like that. That's really common. Our minds are designed to think, right? They're absolutely designed to think. So they are doing their job when we sit there and think about things. And so again, just kind of normalizing these things, but it can be really good indications of feeling stressed or burned out. And we'll talk a little bit more about what to do after that. Also angry, this kind of irritated, angry. I'm sure, I know for me, like the week before I went on vacation, I was just, every little thing was bothering me, just feeling like irritated, angry, things that wouldn't normally be a big deal were suddenly big deals. And especially when we're working with youth, big, little things can be a lot bigger. So just really checking in around like, okay, so I noticed maybe you're feeling angry right now. Is something else going on? Are you feeling stressed out about other things? Kind of using these checklists as conversation starters, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Mentally also looks like negative self-talk, right? So this might be beating ourselves up, right? Being like getting really down on ourselves, feeling really hard on ourselves. I know that this is a really big topic. I actually have a whole presentation, a whole workshop just surrounding negative self-talk. And oftentimes this can kind of be the root of a lot of the anxiety or the stress that comes with life. And so that's also a really good indication of, okay, I need to maybe take a time out here, is when that self-talk just gets a little much. Feeling overwhelmed, and I also said underwhelmed. The reason I said underwhelmed is because it kind of can look like numbness. When we feel so overwhelmed that we just kind of shut down. So that's kind of why I put both of those on there, is because this can be the like, oh, I'm okay. I'm fine, right? That whole classic I'm fine thing. I was so good at that as a teenager. So I think that that's just a really good thing to watch out for, is the like flatlined numbness, everything's okay, everything's fine, with the underwhelm and the overwhelm as well. So then I want to talk a little bit about environment. So this right now we have so many stressors for our young people, right? We have COVID-19. School is like way different than they've ever done before. Work, they might be out of work. Work might look totally different. Their home life looks different right now, right? With like the quarantine or sheltering in place. Sports, I mean, what's even that right now, right? And for young people, that might be a really big deal. They might get a lot of benefits out of sports, and they might not be able to access that right now, and that could be really stressful. Relationships, I'm sure relationships look a lot different right now, and in general, relationships are stressful. I mean, we can probably all testament to that. And then social media. Social media can be a very large point of stress for our young people. And in fact, there's a lot of studies right now showing the increase of anxiety and depression amongst young people, specifically amongst our young women. So young women are experiencing more increased anxiety and depression, and it's happening for young men as well. And a lot of that has to do the correlation between when social media came out and when smartphones came out and things like that, and the correlation between increases of anxiety and depression, pretty spot on. So there's just a lot pointing to social media, a lot of comparison of relationship stuff, cyberbullying. There's keeping up with it, right? That's also a pressure. Making sure everything looks perfect and is just right, and getting back to people and stuff like that. There's a lot of pressure in that. And so these are just, so I just wanted to bring some awareness to the different topics of our environment and our young people's environments, and those stressors being very real factors for our young people. All right. So what can you do, right? What can you do as somebody who works with youth? Really normalize feeling stressed. I know a lot of times when I talk to young people, they're like, yeah, like adults just don't really understand, or they don't get it, or they think I'm just a kid. I hear that really often, and I'm sure you've heard it something along those lines too. And really normalizing, yeah, you're stressed. Yeah, you have a lot to be stressed out about. It's okay to feel stressed. And this can look like not trying to fix it, we're not trying to change it, but really, if we can just be there and listen and validate their feelings. And oftentimes, I know nobody really likes to, be told what to do, right? No one really wants that. And so especially teenagers. And so if we come in and they're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling stressed, and they're like, oh, well, you should do this, 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 and this, and this. And you're like, that's probably not gonna get the response that we're looking for. So if we can just really listen and validate, then they can feel safe, they can feel heard, they can feel seen, and they know that you're a safe person that they can come to if something else comes up in the future. And maybe from there, once the rapport is built, you can, and maybe you already have that rapport built, which is amazing, then you can kind of be like, well, maybe this is what I do, and maybe try some of this. And we'll kind of get to that in a moment. But another thing that I really enjoy doing is become curious about the stress, right? What is the stress telling you? Because our bodies are brilliant, right? Our bodies tell us what's going on. And our mental health is also an indicator of something's going on in our bodies and our minds that maybe needs some adjustment. So in this little chart, if you're tired, maybe your body is telling you that you need to rest or sleep or say no to things. Maybe put up some boundaries, maybe take a little bit off your plate. But this is something to listen to and to not ignore. Feeling anxious, maybe it's time to use some coping skills. Maybe it's time to self-soothe a little bit. If you're feeling angry, maybe explore what boundaries are being crossed. Anger is such a normal reaction to things. Anger is a normal reaction when our boundaries are being crossed. It's our body's messenger to tell us that something's wrong. Something's wrong here. So if we're angry about something, we can check in and be like, okay, what's wrong right now? What's going on? And then depressed. So again, using coping skills, but also connection to others, right? The antidote to depression, which is often comes from isolation and feeling alone, is being able to connect with others. And it might be hard to do in that moment, but if we're feeling low, a really great way can be maybe our body is trying to tell us that we need some more connection in our lives. So yeah, normalize and then become really curious about what's going on. And then comes to talking about it, right? So I love open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are the best, right? So what are the pros and cons of distance learning for you, right? They can't say a yes or no to that one. They can't just kind of cut it off, right? So just really being open to hearing what they have to say on the topics. And then from there, we can kind of figure it out a little bit more. Also, scaling questions. I find these to be super helpful. I use these with groups in the high schools that I work in. And it gets to the point where I can just be like, tell me what number you're at right now, okay? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much stress, anxiety, sadness, whatever it is, fill in the blank, are you feeling right now? And that can be a really easy way to really fast, really easy way to just get in touch with what is going on for them right there in that moment. And yeah, I've literally been walking down the hall one day and been like, hey, what's your number? Hey, where are you at right now? What's going on for you? And it can just be a really easy way for you to get a lot of information about the youth that you're working with. Noticing and observing, right? So you all are working with these youth, you care about them. I'm sure that you've noticed things and can observe things that they might not be aware of. And you can bring what you're noticing and what you're observing to their attention in a very caring and compassionate way. So I've noticed you've been a little distant or withdrawn or less energy, whatever that is, just saying it. Hey, I've kind of observed there's maybe been a shift here. What might be going on there? Or just also, some of these kids that we work with don't get noticed at home. And you can be that adult for them to notice. So they might say, no, nothing, I'm fine. They might say that, but deep down, they've registered in their mind somewhere that an adult has noticed them. And that is very, very powerful. So noticing and observing whatever the behavior is, whatever maybe it's the way they're talking, maybe it's the way they're acting, maybe it's the way they're dressing, just noticing and observing that there's been a shift and checking in around that. And the next one, sharing, right? So this is a really great opportunity for you to self-disclose. I know one of the ways I build rapport with my teenagers is by telling them like, hey, I know what I was going through when I was your age. This is what was happening for me. Have you ever experienced something like that? So yeah, I know when I'm stressed out, I usually fill in the blank. And then, does that ever happen to you? Right? So I think these are just ways where we can use a little self-disclosure to have some more connection with these youth. So I did have a poll question for everybody. Sarah Michael, can we go ahead and set up the first poll question?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Everyone should see it now.
So how do you first recognize the signs and symptoms of stress in your life? Do you notice it physically or do you notice it mentally? And then the second one is, how do you first recognize the signs and symptoms of stress in young people? Do you notice it physically or do you notice it mentally? We'll just kind of give everyone a few minutes to check in around that.
About half of people have responded. Give it another 20 seconds. I'm seeing your questions in the chat, everyone. When Brinn's finished, we'll go over those. Okay, a couple more seconds. Maybe you can't fill out the poll because you're like on the phone. I'll share it now. Can you all see it now?
Yeah. So yeah, we're at a pretty good, it looks like for your own self, you might mentally recognize what's going on for you. And then in other people, you might physically recognize what's going on for people. And I think this is a really good indication of how much stress is a physical and mental how they're so connected, right? So it's a manifestation both physically and mentally. And sometimes, just recognizing that can be really helpful, especially for youth. Like if you're noticing something going on with youth, they might not recognize that what's happening in their body is from stress. They might not recognize that stomach aches or headaches or zits or things like that are signs of stress, but this could actually be a really helpful tool for them to start being able to recognize that in their own selves. And that's something that you might be able to help them with recognizing. Okay, so I was supposed to actually ask that poll question a little earlier, and I have a second poll question that I have next. So let's see. Oh, actually, we'll wait on that for a second. All right. So self-care tools. You lead by example. Already you are a leader to these youth and you have done so much. And just by you being you is amazing. And you can, research shows that one positive adult in a youth's life can make the world of difference and can really help offset maybe some of the other negative experiences that they're having. And so by you being there for them and also letting them know, hey, I get stressed out and this is what I do, can be really helpful for them. And then brainstorming coping skills with youth. So Donielle is going to talk more details about actual like physical coping skills. This is more of a broader overview. So brainstorming, again, no one likes being told what to do. So brainstorm what works for them, which kind of goes into the second one of notice what they're already doing. People already take care of themselves, right? People already, we've all kind of got to this point in our lives, right? We've survived this long. We're doing something to deal with stress, whether that's listening to music, or maybe some people draw, or maybe some people talk to somebody, or maybe just being in the organization with you is helpful. Notice what they're already doing and point it out to them, because they might not know that what they're doing is a coping skill. And so if you can let them know, hey, that right there, you're doing a great job at that. Maybe we can figure out how to incorporate more of that into your life. And check in around screen time. Right now, young people feel very defensive about their screen time. And if you ask them, if you were to have a conversation with teens about screen time and ask them, what do you think is a healthy amount of screen time? You might be surprised at the answers. I had a client we were talking about screen addiction, and she was basically spending all of her days on her screens, not doing her homework, not attending class online and things like that. And when I asked her, what do you think a healthy amount of screen time is? She said 1 hour. So even though she had spent her entire 12 hours on a screen, she knew that healthy would be 1 hour. And we've worked to meet that goal. So check in around that. Other self-care tools, these are big ones. Identifying the inner critic. So Sarah, can you put up the poll really quickly? And we'll just make this one real fast because of our time. But I want to put up the other poll. Do you have an inner critic? Yes, all the time. Yes, sometimes, or never.
These are going to be some good results. I'm watching it in progress. Okay, it's been about 30 seconds, so I'm going to end the poll.
Cool.
Put your response in. Okay, share result.
All right. So, sounds like we got a lot of inner critics out there. Again, I do a whole long presentation on this. We're only going to talk about it for a few minutes, but I really think it's important to acknowledge our inner critics, because there isn't a single person on here, basically, it looks like, that has never had an experience with their inner critic. And most of us is, yes, almost all the time we have our inner critic. So if that's happening for us, imagine what's happening for our youth, right? And so much of anxiety and lowness, depression, these negative stress comes from our internal self-talk and our internal critic. So if we can just identify that thing exists, it can help create some space. So if we can say, oh, that's the critic. That's not me. That's not Brinn. That's the critic. It's like, oh, okay, it's a little more helpful, and it kind of creates some space. So one way to kind of combat that is, how would you talk to your best friend about the situation? Because often we beat ourselves up in a way that we would never say to a friend. So if we can kind of get them to reframe it a little bit and to acknowledge, hey, I'm not talking to myself very nicely. What is a way that I could talk to myself a little bit more nice? My favorite, coming up with a positive phrase. So I am capable of. I love the word capable because it's not saying that you're the best or you're going to get it right all the time or you're going to do it every single time, no matter what. It just says that you're capable. And a lot of young people can get behind the fact that they are capable of doing things. They might not want to do them. They might do them all the time, but they are sure as heck capable of doing it. So coming up with some sort of I am capable phrase where they can, put it on their phone, set it as a reminder, write it down, create some art around it. This can be really, really helpful. I do this with absolutely every single one of my clients and love working on the positive phrases, the positive affirmations, and have seen a lot of really cool results from it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, I know Donielle is going to talk more. Last one. Is that thought 100% true? We often tell ourselves stories, and those stories are often not true. And I will say things like, have you ever been in a texting conversation with someone and all of a sudden you text them and they don't text back? How many stories go in your head around why they didn't text back? And how many of those stories are actually true? So it's an example that I use with teens a lot to just show that our minds are designed to think. They're designed to figure out solutions to things, and we're trying to figure stuff out. And oftentimes it can kind of go to a more negative a place than a positive place. So just questioning the thoughts. Is that thought 100% true? Okay. All right, now MEDS. This is my favorite acronym for all of self-care. Again, I know Donielle is going to talk more about actual self-care tools. MEDS stand for mindfulness or meditation, exercise, diet, sleep. So we all know that, you know, exercise, diet, sleep are good for us. Mindfulness is a big buzzword these days. Meditation. If people feel a little weird about the word meditation, you can just say breathing, you know, just doing some breathing. And just really, these are all areas where we make a small difference. A small change can make a very large difference. So just being aware of these things in your own life, being aware of them in your youth's life, checking in around sleep. You know, screens right now are a big cause. Screens and video games are a big cause of not getting a lot of sleep. Diet, you know, looking at sugar intake. Okay, whole thing around that. You know, sugar is the first drug we hook kids on, but that's just, you know, a thought. Exercise, making sure these kids are moving their bodies and getting outside, especially right now with sports not being available, school not being available, walking to and from classes, even being out during breaks, making sure they're moving their bodies. Mindfulness, meditation, breathing, things like that. Okay. So thank you so much. That is it for my section. I have some of my contact information, and yes, please, let's open it up for some Q&As. Sarah, if you want to facilitate some of that.
Yeah, so we had Cynthia ask, how about when you are stressed out that you feel numb? Would that also be underwhelmed, or is there another term for it? That was when you were, Brinn, this is when you were talking about how stress manifests, and like, is one of that being numb? Is there a word for that?
Absolutely. So yes, numb is often a defense mechanism from feeling the feelings that we don't want to feel. Mm-hmm. And so whether that's, you know, anger or sadness, oftentimes sadness is underneath anger, and they can be really overwhelming. So feelings can be super, super overwhelming, especially for young people. And especially in today's age where there's a lot of, I don't know, I think there's a lot of stigma around people having big feelings. And right, there's lots of like negative thoughts around like, oh, you're in your feels, or, you know, just like different ways that people are kind of coming down on people who have strong emotions. And so we can kind of cut them off and shut down. So yes, we might feel overwhelmed, but it might present as numb, which might look like underwhelmed. It might just look like flat, kind of underwhelmed, like fine, you know, that kind of a thing. Does that answer the question?
I totally relate to that. I don't know if Cynthia will be able to like respond to that, but I definitely feel numb and like when I'm overwhelmed with just my emotions. So thank you. Rebecca was wondering if you could explain self-soothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we had more time to talk about it, because I often talk about that with the inner critic. And the inner critic is basically when it's kind of beating us up, things like that. The self-soothing can look like, it's okay, I'm okay. It's kind of like talking to your best friend. Like, what would you say to your best friend? You'd say, it's okay that you didn't do so well on that test. You'll do better next time. You know, that kind of thing. Self-soothing is like being your own compassionate caregiver, essentially, because we might not get that at home, we might not get that externally, but if we can start soothing our own selves, maybe it's through breathing or positive self-talk, or coping skills. Using coping skills is self-soothing. It's just kind of a different way of framing it, and I realize that might be confusing, so I apologize for that. And I think if we had more time, we would definitely launch more into into what that could look like to combat specifically the negative self-talk.
Yeah, definitely. Just one small, like, hopefully question. Brandon is asking, what about good stress, like laughing and hugs? I'm not,
Those
yeah,
are
go ahead.
wonderful things. Yes. And again, I think Donielle might cover some of the more positive aspects. This was just kind of an overview, but yes, absolutely. Watching funny videos, watching, laughing with friends, connections, all sorts of things are so vital and important. And that's something that, again, if we had more time, we would definitely go into.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brinn, for that presentation. Let's have Donielle, if she can share her screen now, go more in depth.
All right. Yeah, I'll add some more to the self-care toolkit you're building right now. I'm also laughing at myself because, wait, why can't I do this? Bear with me, because I have the worst time sticking to time limits when I'm developing my presentations. And not only do I have too many, I added two while I was listening to the presentation. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so let me get back to you from editing my slides.
Good. It'd be like that sometimes.
And hello everyone, I'm Donielle Prince and I work for ACEs Connection, and I'm very slow at finding my share screen. Okay, we're here. All right, and let me go back here. And yeah. I work for ACEs Connection, and it's an online platform that kind of curates and shares out information around adverse childhood experiences, trauma-informed practice, and resilience building. And so please visit the site. It's free to, you don't even have to join to browse. And if you want to interact on the page, it's a networking page. If you want to interact, you just join for free and create a profile and see what people are doing around the country and now the globe around trying to build resilient, trauma-informed communities. So that's my background. And I'm gonna spend this time more. Brinn went over the different dimensions of stress and how it impacts us. And I'm going to take a deeper dive into the physiology of stress, since that's what my organization focuses on, is making sure people are aware that a lot of times we see taking care of ourselves and helping ourselves avoid stress as a side thing you do when you get to it, but it's really central. And when I start talking about some of the consequences of the health consequences of stress, it underscores how important it is that our self-care and collective care should be the priority, really. And so I'm going to start us off with a video. I have to figure out how to get there. Let's see. Oh, and before I do that, I meant to do this before I shared screen. Maybe Sarah Michael can just tell me. If you know how to use the react button at the bottom of your screen, mine is where, maybe I don't have it.
Are you wanting people to react to something?
Yeah, I'm gonna just ask a question, just so I know how much time I really need to spend on talking about ACEs, the ACEs part of this.
Yeah, got it.
So if you could react with a thumbs up if you've had at least one presentation about ACEs before. And then maybe Sarah Michael can tell me like about how many people in the room have had that type of presentation.
Okay.
Like not an exact number, just so you could be like maybe half.
Okay, 2. I think probably like a third of people, as I go through the list, there's like between 1 to 3 people in each slide. So maybe like halfway an explanation.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I am gonna go over it anyway, but just when
Yeah.
I didn't, if it was most people and like you've already even in this forum have had a whole ACEs presentation, I might not bore you with a reminder. But it sounds like a lot of people might want a refresher, or it might be the first time you've heard about it. And the video I'm about to show you features California has the first ever Surgeon General. And she is someone who, Nadine Burke-Harris, she is someone who has championed making people aware of ACEs. And now as the Surgeon General, you may have heard, she's promoting an initiative called ACEs Aware. So a lot of the materials that I'm gonna share, and I have a resource slide at the end, and you will have the slides. There's a lot of material there. So I'm going to present some items, but you could go there and find even more information. And we link a lot of the stuff from ACEs Aware on ACEs Connection. And I should have said the website, acesconnection.com. So when you see her, she's gonna be the main person featured. She'll explain a little bit of the background of toxic stress and how stress can actually impact our health long term, particular experiences that happen in your childhood. And we'll talk about what those are. So now, let me see how to do this. Okay, and tell me if I need to adjust anything.
The reality is that we all need a certain amount of stress, a certain amount of anxiety.
Was everybody hearing everything okay?
Yeah, I think we can hear it.
Okay, let me just pull it up some more. Okay, now I'm gonna just let it go.
To perform well. If we don't care about that exam that we're gonna have tomorrow, we'll probably fail. If we're gonna cross the street and a truck is coming at us, we have release of adrenaline. We have release of a hormone that we call cortisol. We want to jump out of there, and adrenaline and cortisol are going to help us do that. So there's that good amount of stress. But if all day long you're feeling like a truck is coming at you, day after day after day, that's going to take a toll on the body. And the amygdala obviously here has greater activation.
Yes.
In the PTSD. We were able to image children that had experienced trauma and compare those brain images with children that didn't have an experience of trauma, didn't have symptoms.
Right, an exaggerated fear response.
An exaggerated fear response with decreased activation in areas that we need to control that emotion, in the frontal areas.
Exposure to early adversity and trauma literally affects the structure and function of children's developing brains. So the kid next to them hits them, or the teacher reprimands them in a way that they're uncomfortable with, right? Literally what they're feeling, that activation is like there was a truck coming at them. You can give something that will mask symptoms, right? For example, if someone has a cough, right, you can give them a really strong cough serum that will suppress their cough. But if it's because they have tuberculosis or lung cancer, then what you're doing is merely masking the symptoms while the disease process continues to fester. We know what's happening in children's brains and bodies with the experience of toxic stress. So the question now is, what do we do about it?
Okay. So that's a good overview. So now I'll talk about a little bit more detail about why that happens, why toxic stress has these long-term health consequences and kind of what they are at different stages of development. So if you've heard about adverse childhood experiences, it's based on a study that was done in 1998 and was kind of largely ignored till about 2008. And since then, there's been a growing kind of movement to create more awareness about the impact of ACEs and the fact that it's a public health problem that should be addressed systemically. And so these, you can see on the screen, there's 10 items. The original study looked at far more items, but these were the 10 items that if they happened, they asked people to fill out a survey of things that had happened up to the age of 18. And this is before we understood that the brain actually continues developing past 18. So there's more research needed. There might even be more research out there that I'm not aware of, but at the time, the idea was that the brain stops developing at 18, and they wanted to see the impact of traumatic experiences up to that point. And so these were the 10, and they're, you can see that they're 10 and you can read them. They're kind of divided into 3 categories. So the first 3 are abuses, physical abuses. The second 2, 4 and 5 are, the 4 and 5 are both about neglect and maltreatment. And then the remaining 5 are about having, not being able to get your needs met because someone in your family, often a parent or primary caregiver, is not available to you. And that is, that causes, I know I saw that there are a lot of therapists and social workers on this call. And as youth workers, you're probably aware that attachment is a really important part of human development. So just from knowing that, you can kind of understand why so many of the items would have related to things that interfere with attachment. And so you're going to have these slides later, and so I'm not going to spend too much time on kind of the background details, but just to kind of, this slide helps you understand why they're focused on while your brain and body are developing, because we experience trauma as adults as well, but there seems to be a difference when that has health consequences for long-term disease outcomes when that kind of trauma happens to you when you are still developing. And it has to do with how your body learns to respond to stress. And you kind of saw that illustrated in the video. You're responding to stress as even what seems like minor stresses, you're responding to them as though a truck is coming at you. And that has a physiological consequence on your body. And not being a scientist, I can't explain well all of the details of that, but essentially all of the parts of your body that are engaged in order to help you cope with stress end up being engaged all the time when your body wasn't designed to do that. And so the way that I think about it is, if you have a house and you have plumbing that works well, you're happy to have that plumbing because you can use your water to cook, to shower, to use the bathroom, all of those things, and you're very happy that you have water running through your house. But if you were to leave your water on by accident in one of the rooms and then go on a vacation for a week, when you came back, your whole house, you could ruin the foundation of your house because of water. So what you want to be able to do is turn it on when you need it and turn it off most of the time. And so that's sort of how I think about the stress activation system in your body. When you've had certain experiences, it turns on your stress response system physiologically, and it just stays on all the time. And that leads to negative health outcomes. So, and I'm not going to go into really the study. I'll leave it here if you want to read it while I just say this one statement. It turns out that quite a bit of our population is experiencing at least one of these ACEs. And if you haven't experienced one of them, you're definitely in relationship with people who have, because so many people have experienced at least one. An important thing to pull off of this slide is just, it turns out that the more ACEs, the more health risks, especially once you get over 4. But this, a lot of times when I say that, that can be alarming to people if you're thinking about your own ACEs or the ACEs of people that you love. It absolutely can be, the health outcomes change when you take care of your stress, because you can learn to turn off that stress activation system, first by becoming aware of it, and then by engaging in strategies, many of which Brinn has already talked about, that help you relax your body. And it's really a physiological process. We often think about it as, kind of an emotional process of feeling better. But when you do certain strategies for your body, you can actually turn all of those, like your hormonal system, all of the ways that your body is reacting to stress, turn that off, so that now your plumbing is working the way it's supposed to. So it's very important to prioritize doing the things that you can, so you can regulate your stress response. And I love Nia talked about how there's more than just the traditional things that we think about. Even science, which is often slow to catch up on what we might think of as indigenous wisdoms, things like dance and drumming do that for your body. It actually regulates your stress response system. So it doesn't even have to be traditional modalities. And in fact, there's evidence. You may not need evidence because you know that when you dance, you feel good, but the science is also caught up to that. So when you hear people talk about toxic stress is just, it's a way of talking about the complex physiology that I can't even explain, not being a scientist, in a simple way. Toxic stress is not really, it's more just to help us talk about it in a more simple way. And the way that it's defined is as a biological response to severe or repeated adversity in childhood. And it says absent buffering support from a caring and trusted adult. And that just means that, as you saw from what the ACEs were, when there's a support, it doesn't impact the system the same. So it actually is a really important piece to note that it's the experience of those adverse experiences and having no support. With support, you can get a different outcome, even at the time that you're experiencing those stressors. And so this type of stress, while the body is still developing, can impact the nervous system and lead to long-term health consequences if unchecked and untreated. And it's a different story when it is checked and it is treated. And so I'm going to skip by this really fast, but these are the parts of the brain that are impacted. And it was mentioned in the video when the scientists were looking at the scans of the brain. When I talk about the stress, the stress activation system being on all the time, well, these are the parts of the brain that influence that system. And what you will often hear in presentations is that the difference between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where we do all of the things that people want us to do. Go to work and be productive and go to school and plan and follow through. All of that happens with your prefrontal cortex. When you're living in a state of stress activation, this is a physiological process that you don't have conscious control over. Your prefrontal cortex is minimized so that your amygdala can take over, which is the part of your brain that's better at helping you get out of the way of the truck. So your brain is actually shifted. It doesn't mean you don't have any ability to plan. It's just that the prefrontal cortex is, its function is diminished so that you can use more of your physiological resources on survival. So, and that's another way to say that is you're in survival mode more often when you're not aware of your stress and you're not turning that off. And so this slide just kind of, oh, what was that?
I said it's so hard to do.
Yeah.
To like turn off your stress and not be in survival mode.
You're right. It definitely is and feels that way. But I need to get towards the end of make sure I go fast through this part of the presentation, because there are ways you can do it physiologically. And I almost want to, in my head, I want to jump, but I'll wait till I get there. But there are ways that you can do that through your body. And all you need to know is I need to do this. I need to do this every day. And I noticed when people were answering the check-in question, a lot of you are doing it because a lot of you do a lot of different types of exercise, and that's a great one. And so the stress brain loop, that's basically everything I said. So I'll save myself a slide and you can see these later. I love this chart and I actually love it so much. I have it here framed. It's on the far left side, it talks about, it's a list of all the different parts of your physical system, your body, and how your body is impacted by stress, going from a state of apathy is not good either, and what that looks like physiologically. So this is all focused on what your body does when you're in the stress zone. The green and the blue are when you're doing well, like you're not overstressed. So stress activation system is turned off and you're able to, function in a healthy way. But then that's when we start to get stressed, we move into those, you've heard of flight, fight, freeze, there's hyperfreeze and hypofreeze. This chart shows you all of the things that might happen. So if we just look at muscles, and I'll start with when you're in a relaxed state. So when you're calm or active alert, that just might be having a good time, your muscles are relaxed and toned. And when you're more active, they're toned. When you start to get in that, this is the stress activation system is coming online. You, it says reacting to danger, your muscles become tense. When you become terrified, your muscles will become rigid, and it says deer in headlights. And then, this is probably, in the last one is in the domain where things have gotten so bad you're in crisis. And it says then your muscles are flaccid. But most of the time, for the purposes of our conversation, we're moving probably between green and red, probably between green and orange more of the time, and sometimes into the yellow. And it's helpful I like to show this slide because I just want to emphasize to people how stress really is a physiological, there's a physiological connection, and it's not something that should be minimized. Like, do your self-care when you get around to it, or if you're feeling overworked at your job, and that you should just cope with it and you should just get through it because it's having an impact on your health. So quickly, health conditions that are associated with ACEs and toxic stress. The next few slides just kind of show what that looks like at different ages. I'm going to go really quick, and you can look at it more closely when you have the slides. But this is infants, and it starts to show up even with babies. I'm not going to get into the epigenetics part of it, but babies are born with the stress responses of their mothers. They've been able to see that through study. So it even starts in utero. School-age children, more immunological illnesses, difficulty learning behavior, sleep. I think we know some of that. Brinn covered a lot of this. Sometimes people think teens are being dramatic, but one way their stress definitely shows up is in headaches and stomach pain. So when they complain about that, they're probably not being dramatic. They're probably needed, get them checked out with a doctor, but also it's another one of those signals that they might be under a lot of stress, and helping them become aware of that can help them not and have their own ways of caring for themselves can help diminish those physical signs of stress. And then in adults, you pretty much see it's the same things. Difficulty concentrating and making decisions, worsening of health problems that you have. There's research, I mentioned that there's research that shows an association between an ACE score of 4 and long-term health problems. And one thing that the original study showed and has held up through additional research is that when you have these things happen in childhood, they never get addressed. You grow up, you take care of your own life. Even they've looked at it with populations that are doing really well in terms of, they have good income, they have insurance, they have the things that they need, but they never really addressed the traumas that they experienced, never really got treatment. Their stress activation system is that plumbing that's on all the time and they don't even realize it. You start to see people in their middle age start to have a statistically significant greater risk of diseases. And this was surprising when doctors first saw this, because they thought it was mostly lifestyle and genetics. They didn't realize that your experiences of trauma could be part of the reason you find that people who die of the 9 of the 10 leading causes of premature death have ACE scores of 4 or more, untreated. 11 times as likely to have Alzheimer's, 3 times as likely to have, it says chronic lower respiratory disease, twice as likely to have stroke, cancer, or heart disease, and 1.5 times as likely to have diabetes. And so these all have a relationship to stress. And I threw in secondary stress. I know we're talking about, these things are relevant to youth and to youth workers, to children and adults. So I wanted to throw in about secondary stress. Unchecked chronic stress can lead to as we're talking about, the biological byproducts of stress accumulate in your body and brain, and that affects your health and well-being. And over time, this can leave you feeling depleted and less able to care for yourself, your family, your clients in the manner you'd like. So it's so important to make a plan, which we'll get to very soon. Be intentional about taking care of your body and addressing sources of stress. And I added in here, including institutions and systems. And I don't even know if I'm going to get to that part of it, but it's so important to go beyond just thinking that self-care is about you as an individual, because some of your sources of stress really are coming from the outside of you. And that if we could make those changes to institutions and systems, that would remove some of our stress. And so I hope I get to that part, but you'll see it in the slides if I don't, because I want to make sure that I do go through the self-care planning, because I think that's what you're really asking for. And we've kind of talked about that. I'll stop here just to say, there's been a lot of research over these past 20 years since the ACEs study came out. And so there's something called population attributable risk, which is a technique that looks at different kinds of social, behavioral, and health outcomes. And it suggests that if you addressed childhood trauma, it would make this percentage of that problem disappear in our population. So I don't know statistics, but I know I explained that well. So I don't know how they figure that out, but what that ends up meaning is they believe that 78% of IV drug abuse would disappear if people didn't have those ACEs, or they had a way of addressing the stress response, and also on another level, healing the trauma from the experiences that they had. And so I'm not going to go over every one of these, but that's pretty powerful.
So you're saying it would be 43% less homelessness if those ACEs were addressed when people were young?
Or if those ACEs were addressed, and that's what we would rather, is people didn't even experience those things, but also being treated. Because what happens is people grow up, and then it's like the childhood traumas they experienced never happened. I mean, that, in terms of whether they think about it again or deal with it or get any kind of help or treatment. And physiologically, they're a person who is always running from a truck, and they don't even know that. Mm-hmm. So some of these are social and behavioral, and we talk about people having high risk behaviors, but what people are really having are coping with being in that state all the time. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of, so that's kind of the idea of how, so it's not just in other words, there's still hope after being an adult. It's not just you had these things happen and now you're doomed. That's not it at all. But if they're treated, we could reduce some of these conditions according to that research. And okay, and I'm going to go through this really fast so I can get to I'm going to prioritize getting to the self-care planning, but I'm going to just go really fast. But I just want you to know people are out there talking about how the ACEs and all the research and financial investments that have flowed from focusing on ACEs are really focused on the individual and not the system. And people are just really pushing back hard that we live in a system that causes toxic stress. And this needs to be a part of the research. So I wanted to share that with you. I'm probably not going to go over the slides related to that though. And so this is one that I think this is Building Resilient Communities. Wendy Ellis is someone who pushes back really well and does research and programming in this area. And so these are the ACEs, they're the branches of the tree. And then she points out what the roots are. So you have to address the roots. And more recently, climate change has been added to. RISE, if you've never, you may all know of RISE since it's another youth center, but it's in Richmond. And anytime you have an opportunity to participate in their trainings, it's just amazing. They really push back hard against the idea that this is only individual inside of families. And I won't go over the whole slide now, but they have like 3 or 4 or 5 slides with their both the way they redefine ACEs. As you can see at the top, it says racing ACEs. If it's not racially just, it's not trauma informed. And so they take the pyramid for the original ACEs study and they add those root issues to that pyramid. And this is a great slide to look at when you have time. So now we're getting closer into the toolkits. Let's see, and what I may do is just the first poll, not right this second, but just to let Sarah Michael know she built polls for me. Probably just do the first one, but not just yet. So I call this evidence-based healing, and all that I mean by that is there's research that's been done just to show. There's research that shows that certain interventions really do help the body heal from that toxic stress. So, and there's one organization, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, that's come up with 5 domains. They call them protective factors. So I haven't listed them the way, you may have encountered those. I haven't listed them the way that they do, but these are the domains. So it's healthy coping and self-care strategies, which you came for today. Supportive social connections, and I just said, aka healthy relationships. We all need we don't just need social connections, we need healthy relationships in our lives. A safety net support network, and that links to the fact that systems cause stress. So if you did all these other things, but you couldn't, you're about to get evicted, that's not going to handle your stress problems. So we have to include that, and they do include that. And it is research-based that when you handle those social determinants of health for people, you reduce their stress. And that shouldn't be a surprise, but research confirms it. So, and then lifespan human development is just a domain. And that's what Brinn did for us today, is helping to normalize the conversation around stress and coping, and so that people aren't thinking they're the only ones. There's something wrong with you. You can't handle it. You can't be productive enough. If you understand the human body and the human experience, you will be able to be much more forgiving to yourself. And forgiving isn't even the word. You'll understand that you are there's nothing wrong with you. And then it's just about finding ways to help offset those negative things that are happening, either treating things that happened in childhood, getting treatment and healing for that, and also trying to prioritize taking care of yourself and others that you love. And then social emotional self-awareness and communication skills. And that's it's almost self-explanatory, but it's just, we have to have, and Brinn talked about that too, using herself as an example, like noticing if she can be aware that she's stressed, that's going to change how she communicates with people. And she'll think about, how do I get my needs met? And then she will be able to being just aware of your feelings and aware of and aware of stress, and then taking and then being able to communicate what you need to others. So now we are in we're where we need to be. I mentioned, you saw the Surgeon General, and I mentioned ACEs Aware. A lot of the material I'm using, especially from here on, is from the ACEs Aware website. There's so much information there, and we link to it on ACEs Connection. The Surgeon General is really, she wants things to be research-based. So, and so she was engaged in some research in the past, and these are 6 domains. So they pretty much overlap with the other ones that I showed you, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, but there's 6 here. And I'll start with the supportive relationships. She calls them stress busters. Supportive relationships, physical activity, quality sleep, that is so important, balanced nutrition, mental health care, and mindfulness practices. And so we're going to talk about some of the things you can do in those domains. And so I have things for both youth and for adults, because this affects all of us. So calming care plan for youth, movement. And I think as I was preparing these slides, I think youth workers know these things, but I guess this just reinforces that you're doing the right things. Things are a little bit difficult because you don't have your youth with you now. But it depends on what kind of way that you're a youth worker. But if you have programs, you do include these types of things. Usually, you know that kids need that. But now you also know that helps them calm their activated stress response. And when going outside is not an option, there's a lot more possibilities. And I agree with Brinn, brainstorming, be creative. You don't have to look at a list, but just this just reinforces that you're doing the right thing. These are, another word for this is emotional regulation strategies. So if you're inside, maybe if there's room, a small trampoline, things that help you use, there's more scientific ways to say that, but use up that energy, but that is actually regulating for that stress response system. So trampoline, bouncing a ball, Play-Doh, there's something called Mad Matter, that's kind of fun. Pipe cleaners, making different designs of the pipe cleaners. These are things that are physical. And this is calming, to sit and listen to either their own music or headphones that you might have in the space. And again, dance. And journaling, this is a great activity. The journaling, and it doesn't have to be words. Not every kid wants to write, and they might feel more like school, but having art supplies and encouraging, they can use it in any way they want, but encouraging at least one page or one activity that asks them to express how they're feeling in that art form or in writing, if they actually really enjoy doing that, creating stories. Because what you're trying to do is create more awareness of their emotions, which helps them to regulate. And I won't have to go over this because I heard Brinn talk about that. And I think I already know that you had a presentation by Christopher Williams on the relationship, so you know all about this. The only thing I'll share about this is, even though our nervous system may have learned unhealthy way of responding to stress, it can be unlearned. We talked about that. And relationships are central. It might be the most important, if you could only do one. Relationships are literally healing. And so I know you had a deep, so I won't spend much time. And Brinn mentioned the research about, there's research that shows you could take 2 kids who have, even in the same family, who have very similar experiences, and they have 1 year. It can be as little as 1 year where the stressors that they experience happen before and after their encounter with a caring adult, and you will see differences in their outcomes. So that's really powerful. And the only thing I'll stop here is a slide to talk about why relationships are so healing. Is just that one of the consequences of having ACEs is it leads to disruption of trust, and relationships help restore that. We're not going to do the polls at all, sorry. And I have because I'm running out of time. So But in the resources slide, I have the stress test. And the reason why I wanted to do these together is I wanted us to see where we were with our stress, and to tie that into, that means that's an indicator you want to take an inventory. What are the things have you done that are for self-care? So we're going to go into the self-care, and I'll go through this. This is what you really came for, and I'll try to leave 5 minutes for questions. Sorry about that.
Donielle, do you have like some extra time after 11:30? Like, could you go over?
Yeah, I can. I don't have to go. Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm happy to stay.
What about
I'll stay for questions?
say that again?
I'll stay for questions. That's what I'll do. So like I can take a little bit more time in the the next 8 minutes. So self-care planning and supportive relationships, you heard that those are the research domains, and here's some ideas. And so what I was going to ask you to do, and if you have time as I go by quickly, but also you can go back and look at it. I was going to ask you to check off then how many of these things you've done this week and how many of these things you've done in the past month. And if you have a high stress test score, which there's a link to it in the resources slide of the slide set, that's an indication of what you need to focus on for your self-care plan. Exercise, I saw a lot of exercise, a lot of you are getting that one done. Nutrition, we all understand all of these things, but just know that the research supports that you do really well by your stress activation system when you set yourself up with a good nutrition. So the more you can focus on that, the better. Sleep is huge and it's hard, especially when you're stressed. So these are some strategies for trying to, I think if you're doing those other things, it'll help you be able to sleep because it'll help relieve some of that, that weight that's on your mind. But these are some other strategies that can help you try to work on your sleep. Mindfulness practices, and this was, I had that for the youth, it works for adults too. And so these are just suggestions, and again, you can always brainstorm, and they suggest the mindfulness app, but just kind of being aware of how you're feeling and taking time for yourself to either be aware or be without thoughts even. Mental health, we get that, and it's important, and it's another one of the research-based, evidence-based healing. And then RISE. So let's see what my time is like. So I'm not going to read, but this is the pushback. There's a memo they wrote, and they really pushed back on the adverse childhood experiences study for not addressing the root causes, as I shared. So if you want to read some more words around that, that's in the slides. And this was from a forum they did, and they just redid a few weeks ago, Racing ACEs, and just talking about how we really need to think about oppression as a source of toxic stress. And it's a great quote. You could read it later. Really would, you can, I love this, but if I have time, I'll come back to this video. This is the
RISE is a chart.
Yeah, this is the RISE chart. This is what they mean by root causes, and they really name everything. I mean, you have nation building, enslavement, genocide on here as the causes of what they call dehumanization and stress. But what's also wonderful is they have thought through, what does liberation and healing look like if you acknowledge that systems are causing toxic stress. So this, I've been encountered this many times at RISE, and they also have a set of questions, and I forgot to add that to the resources. I'll add it. The resources, these slides are on a link, so if I add things, you can find it later. But they have a set of questions that are, it's an amazing experience to sit there and answer those questions related to this. You answer them in relation to yourself, your family, your community, and your workplace. That's a healing activity in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so the last part of this, have some slides here. I'm gonna stop right at 11:30, so people who can stay for questions, we can do that. So self-care planning is also resistance. One of my favorite writers is Robin Kelley, who's a UCLA professor, and he wrote, I'm going to actually read this one, and my favorite line is the last one. Trauma is real, it's no joke. Mental health services and counseling are urgently needed, but reading Black experience, and you can consider that the experiences of oppressed peoples, reading Black experience through trauma can easily slip into thinking of ourselves as victims and objects rather than agents, but the impulse to resist is neither involuntary nor solitary. It is a choice made in community, made possible by community, and informed by memory, tradition, and witness. If Africans were entirely compliant and docile, there would have been no need for vast expenditures on corrections, security, and violence. Resistance is our heritage, and resistance is our healing. So, and that's a point that Rise makes also. So if we acknowledge that systems are a source of toxic stress, resistance becomes part of our healing. And then, I'm gonna skip that part. And this, I kind of made this point, but it's a good quote by playwright Naomi Wallace in that same vein. And then when I saw, these are the ones I added when I saw Nia's comment. Shauna Murray Brown is a licensed social worker, and she trains people in, I think it's called decolonial therapy. And if you go through the training, you can be listed as a decolonial therapist. So I'll just go to the part that reminds me of what Nia said. The second paragraph really, well, dancing by the drum, sitting in silence and simplicity, that's the mindfulness, ritual chanting and singing, breathing in sync with movement, fasting, etching messages on the wall, creating dye from the sweetness of the earth, nourishing the body in rhythm with the seasons. These ancient wisdoms from all over the world hold a way of being with and connecting to, noticing suffering or casting it away. All the ways of honoring the fullness of existence, noticing connection in all things, tangible and intangible. These knowledges have been embedded as a way of being, a worldview of existing, not merely a lifestyle that picks and chooses. That's not how these knowings came to us. The universe is medicine. Mind body healing is how we liberate ourselves through stillness, intention, love, and inquiry. And I wish I had more time, but there's the resources slide. And I didn't tell you this before because I didn't want you to jump ahead, but you can go right now and see these slides. It's at bit.ly/heal-stress, and I'll add the Rise questions later on. Probably not till tomorrow because this day is gonna be long. But a lot of the things that you heard, I've put them into slides, but these are the resources. So there's even more information when you go to those links. And let's see, I'm done. So now I can take questions at 11:30.
Thank you all so much for coming. I know some people have to out, but we really appreciate you joining us, and hopefully you learned how to recognize stress within yourself and others. Donielle and Brinn have shared ways to build resilience and manage your stress. And I think for me, what I took away is like, it's important not to fix, but to listen to our young people and to remember that it takes one caring adult to be that buffer and that protective factor, especially, you know, when it comes to adverse childhood experiences. And also, like, you know, being observant and noticing, you know, these things and checking, you know, in on them. And I think in a way, if you take what you've learned today and you're able to affirm the young people that you work with that, you know, it's okay, and that like what you're experiencing is normal, and then, you know, providing them, you know, telling them how you manage your stress and being that role model, I think, as Brinn was saying, can go a long way in helping those that we support. So thank you so much. We will take questions now if you're able to stay on. And I do have some that I noted, Donielle. Brina was asking, what forms of treatment are you referring to when you showed the chart?
The color chart?
I think so, yeah. I think it was
Yeah.
that one that was like left to right. What forms of treatment?
Well, some of it, will be the body regulating, like I showed, I know I went too fast, but the things that help your body regulate, so breathing, and I didn't even think I forgot to put breathing, and that's a really important one. But breathing, movement, those evidence-based domains, when you build a self-care plan that incorporates those for yourself, for youth, if you try to include that kind of self-care thinking into the kind of activities you design for youth, this is going to change the physiology. And so what you'll see, like I have the chart here, what you'll see is it will help you, it will help anyone who's doing that on a regular basis move from the orange and red into the green and blue. So, but it just has to be, you know, like anything, it needs to be regular. Like anything that you master, you can't just do it sometimes. You have to do it on a consistent basis, and then you get the healing impacts.
And I feel like that is just like, I can see how that can happen in terms of incorporating movement. A lot of, I feel like what people were saying in the self-care was, you were saying it was exercise, or it was gardening, or it was cooking, like all of those things, like, you know, they're not sedentary, they're not just like, you know, sitting there, even though, you know, breathing and like mindfulness and meditation are also like important. You know, I think it can, we can help ourselves move away from being stressed if, like you were saying, we change those physiological aspects. Amber Pearson is raising their hand. If you wanted to ask a question, go ahead. Amber, are you able to? And like I said, we'll be sharing, Donielle, I believe, shared the link to the slide. You said it was at
Yeah, I'll type it again. bit.ly/heal stress. And
so you'll get that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, they're up right now. And I just have to add that those questions for you for the RISE slide.
Awesome. And the recording might take a day or two because it has to, I don't know, download all the way or something like that. Are there any other questions?
Sarah Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Brianna. I have a question.
Brianna.
Hi, Donielle. So I was actually, when I asked my questions about the forms of treatment, I was referring to when you were giving out the information about the background of ACEs, you kept saying if left untreated, X, Y, and Z would happen. So I meant like in that form. So are there recommended forms of treatment? I mean, I assume like therapy is probably one for like unresolved trauma, but outside of therapy, is there anything else that's recommended?
I would say also in those research domains. So the therapy, making sure you're taking care of your body, because what I'm focused on, or really that's like kind of the ACEs aware framework. You have the stress activation system, and it definitely can lead to disease outcomes. So you want to change your physiology so that you won't have those disease outcomes, even if you had like all 10 of those ACEs. So that's why they've identified those research-based ones that they know when people are regularly engaged in those 6 ways in terms of the Surgeon General, and the 5 ways in terms of the Center for the Study of Social Policy, that you are changing your physiology. And if you don't know that having trauma in your childhood that you've left behind, you don't think about is still affecting your health, then you won't take any action. So even though I know those things seem really simple, but that focus is more on the physiology. But I think a deeper answer to the question is is more in that liberatory side of the presentation, because it's like understanding, like connected to the domain of understanding your human development, and Brinn's point about normalizing. If you understand that systems are connected to your experiences of trauma, that can go a long way to you understanding not to blame yourself for outcomes that you've had, or maybe things that you've done. If you can understand it in that systemic way. So it's sort of taking a deeper dive into how can you participate in resistance? So it might just be educating yourself about systems. You could be taking action in the community. Even if you don't see yourself as an activist, you might be a youth worker who is working with youth to help them have to help them have more opportunity and to process the experiences that they're having. So, and doing that from a sense that they're not wrong, they're not, just some bad people who make bad choices from bad families and the way our society defines it, but you're helping liberate them and empower them from systems that are designed to harm them. And I think that is healing. There's not an evidence-based part of the wheel for it, but I'm sure of it anyway.
Oh yeah. I think I've done those questions you were talking about through Rise Center, about like generational trauma and like oppression, and yeah, it is definitely healing to like look at that and to be able to name what it is that like causes you stress. And sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to cutting you. Go ahead. When you are done, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Salima.
But you can continue because I disturb you.
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, you can continue because I disturb you, and when you are done, I will ask my question.
Oh no, I'm done. You can go ahead.
Okay. I'm Salima Habibi. I'm working with the Mutual Assistance Network, and mostly I'm working with the families who have kids. Some of my families, they are asking that even their 2 years old or 2 years and a half, the child is not sleeping well, even they are taking to the daycare. They are also the other child at his age is going to sleep, but he's awake, and also at home he's awake. This could be a stress or for the 2 years old or 2 years and a half that trying to not go to sleep, and they are asking me that how they can help the child to go to sleep soon.
I don't know if Brinn is still on here, because I know she would probably have a good answer to that. I would want them to work with I go-to therapist to try to figure out how. I think the parents need tools to figure out how to have those conversations that Brinn was talking about at an age appropriate level. And I'm not sure how old the children are, because they may, there's so much going on, and the younger you are, the harder it is for you to tap into processing it, because I don't know how old the children are.
Yeah,
but
the child is 2 years and a half.
3,
yeah.
Yeah.
So the parents would really need help from a professional to try to figure out how to have the conversation, so that the child is not just in their head thinking all kinds of things about what's going on and feeling this fear all the time, but they don't know how to communicate that. And the therapist can provide those kind of tools, and they're probably pretty simple, but it just helps to talk to someone who knows and has had a lot of experience. So then the parents know what questions to ask, and they will probably be very surprised and didn't even realize their kids were thinking all of those things. Sometimes that will help a lot. And the therapist can also give guidance about, then maybe developing a routine that addresses some of those fears, and until they can gradually sleep. And probably the other point would be, it won't change overnight, but once you start to address what's going on that is making the child maybe afraid to sleep. I'm not sure. That they'll get more comfortable over time. But I think that intervention with a professional would be really helpful. Even the child's pediatrician might have some good sound advice.
Okay. I already talked to them when you are taking to your family doctor. You can talk about, but I'm thinking that it is a question that I couldn't provide them an answer for the mom. So that's why I asked you. Thank you so much.
Did you catch that, Donielle?
What was that?
Did you catch the end of what Selena was saying around she's just like looking for maybe something she could tell the parents to support them, but I think you're just recommending to speak to a professional and maybe even the child's pediatrician to go about why maybe the child is having difficulty sleeping or is afraid to sleep.
Yeah, because it's hard. You need someone with experience who can help with those question prompts, because it's a 3-year-old, so it's just a little harder, like to guess, like especially from here, like that is one. I mean, I would rather them go to a professional, but I would want them to start asking, what are your hunches that they might be thinking about? You might not be, it's not enough because you might not actually be aware. They may have encountered something, seen something, and you're not aware of, but you might have a sense of it if you stop. A parent might have a sense if they stop and think about it, like, oh, when did this behavior start? It was right around the time someone in the family got sick. I mean, I'm speculating. But it could be so many things, but once the professional helps with the guidance around the questions, it'll start to unearth. It's really hard to guess. But the parent can start there. If you just start thinking about if there's something that's gone on, if they can try to remember when the change happened, that might give some clues. But they really should follow up and maybe a telehealth appointment even.
So Bina asked earlier, how does trauma impact cognitive learning, aka educational outcomes as well as health outcomes? And then it looked like Christina responded to Bina that trauma changes our brains. So the more trauma/stress, the greater impact on development.
Yeah, it has, there's associations with learning disabilities and developmental delays, although that's not a given. I mean, it's not like, oh, you have trauma and now you're going to definitely have learning disabilities and delays, but there's an association. But in the short term, even if there's not a permanent, but a diagnosable learning disability or delay, when I was showing the brain, and if I were a scientist, I could explain it better. But when you're in that, when your stress system is activated, you're in that flight, fight, or freeze. This is physiological. It is not something you can control. Your prefrontal cortex, where all the learning happens and gets organized, you don't have as much access to it. And that's not a permanent thing. If you could turn off that stress activation system, the amygdala will quiet down, and then your prefrontal cortex will be like, okay, so we're going to brainstorm now, we're going to finish our homework, and we're going to focus and concentrate. But when your amygdala is in charge, it's sort of like in the same way when we, I think Brinn said this, but it might have been during our planning meeting, but it's like, no, wait, this was somewhere else. And someone was I was in a group where they were doing a meditation, a mindfulness exercise with us. And so they had us do things that really relaxed us, and said that one of the things that happens when people do that relaxation exercise is they might suddenly realize they're hungry. And it's because this is the physiology part. Because when you're tense and stressed, that's sending a signal to your body. We're in danger right now, so it's not time for digestion, so don't be hungry. So that's a very unscientific way of explaining it, but that really happens. So other systems get shut down because you need to be ready for the threat. So that's similar with the part of your brain that is best at the accomplishments and the productivity that you, or even creativity that you want to have. So, and I just want to emphasize when, again, because sometimes people think, oh, you had this trauma, so now you're not going to learn well, but that's not always the case. It's just interrupted. When you calm that stress activation, then your prefrontal cortex is fully activated again.
Yeah, I think your slides, if people look at them, they'll be able to, understand it more possibly, because I feel like your slides touched on a lot of that, the cognitive development, the impact that trauma has on cognitive development. Rebecca was asking if there's a way to access previous trainings, like the one referred to before. If you email me, I'll put my email in the chat, then I can send you those previous trainings, like recordings and materials. I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Does anyone have any? If there's some in the chat that I didn't get, that you put in the chat that I didn't get to, and you're still on the webinar, please let me know. Adriana, is that how I say it? Is wondering what that chart was. I think maybe the colorful one, the rainbow one. Is that correct?
Yeah. If it is that color chart, it's in the slides just to look at, and the source is at the bottom. I ordered this. I think probably can get it on Amazon. Let me see. It's Babette Rothschild. I'll write that in here, who developed it. So I think if you Google that, Rothschild, I think there's like a book that goes along with it too. Oh wait, and I'll also write the title. It's Multiple Medical and Physiology Texts. Oh no, it isn't. It's she's saying that she got it from multiple texts. So yeah, if you Google or even on Amazon, I think that's where you'll be able to order it.
Okay, they say thank you. So I think hopefully they found it.
Okay.
She was also wondering if there are any recommendations you would, or resources you'd recommend for a layperson who's interested in having a better foundation. Could you speak to what foundation you're requesting? Because there's been some other people asking about resources, and I can send over, when I send the recording, just what some people have recommended for people can go and get, mental health services.
For the ACEs stuff, the Surgeon General wrote a book, and why am I blanking on the name? I have it here, but my bookshelf is disorganized. But Nadine Burke Harris, I'll type it, Nadine Burke Harris, and if you write book, she has a lot of stuff. You can see her TED, she's all over the place on Google. But she wrote this book, which I read, and it was amazing. And she does.
This one or no?
The Deepest Well. Yeah, that's it. The Deepest Well. And it's a great book. She is a pediatrician, and so she does go into the physiology. It's in an accessible way, but she gets into the details at the same time. Like if she did this presentation, she would be able to tell you exactly every single thing that the body is doing under stress. And she explains that, and she has some great stories about what she noticed in her pediatric clients. Yeah, that's a great book to read, and that will give you a foundation, because she covers like the field. And again, it's really accessible too. It's not a dense type of book. And there's that initiative I mentioned that she's leading, ACEs Aware. They're at the start of it, but there's about to be a whole lot of trainings because that's what the initiative's goal is, to make people ACEs aware. So you can also be on the lookout for that. You can go directly to their website, acesaware.org. There's not a lot there yet in terms of the trainings, acesaware.org. And then ACEs Connection also links to all kinds of trainings on these topics.
Donielle is recommending to go to the ACEs website for a better foundation on the things she's presented. Are you seeing that, Donielle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Reference to lived experience. I'm not sure. Usually when I hear that, one of my work colleagues talks about lived experience, but she talks about it in terms of that we should be relying more on people with lived experience and in the ACEs field, and that links to the systemic issues too. That's why you end up with a list of toxic stress that doesn't include the experience of oppression or social determinants of health, because it's not connecting with, you know, everybody's lived experience. But I hear that term used in a lot of different contexts, so I'm not sure. But ACEs itself stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it's about that study, and it's also those 10 items. That's what people really mean, like really specifically about ACEs.
Well, it's almost noon, so I think we'll wrap up. And if you have any further questions, like feel free to email me, and I can try to direct you to the answer. But I will be sending out this recording and Brinn and Donielle's slides, which will have the handouts or links to other things, like as Donielle was saying, in her slides are links to other things.
Well, thank you, everyone, especially those who stuck around to the bitter end.
Yes, yes. Had a good group. Okay. Well, you have a good rest of your Thursday, and yeah, look out for my email with the materials, and we'll be in touch. I'll probably try to send you a survey to get your feedback on this training, as well as learn what you would like to hear about next. So
thank you, Sarah Michael.
Yes, thank you, Donielle. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you for all the great resources for today.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Great job. Awesome.
Thanks, Allegra.
You're welcome. Bye, Donielle.